Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, March 10th, 2017, and we are ready to go with another show in the sense that I'm here, and you're here, and that makes it our time, and that means it's time for us to roll on another show whether we like it or not. It's Friday, and that used to be sort of the close of the news week. It was easy to catch you up on all the things that you needed to know for weekend discussion, and we will still try and do that, but of course all of what could be discussed over the weekend can change in ways that we didn't used to expect. The Trump era is entirely different. I guess the Donald gets his phone back on weekends or demands it back, and the news cycle goes crazy. Everything gets set on fire over the weekend, and I guess we should expect more of the same. No word, as far as I have seen, with respect to any movement toward Mar-a-Lago this weekend. Usually we see that actually by about midweek. I haven't seen anybody discuss it, but I have been looking around, and I guess that would be unusual. It's out of the ordinary for him not to be in Mar-a-Lago for the weekend at this point, but I don't know, maybe some of the criticism has finally gotten to him. Maybe he's realizing how much he's spending. I don't think he's actually cares about that, but I don't know. I guess anything's possible. We'll review what else is up with the healthcare bomb that they dropped on everybody the other day, and see how that's going, and talk about where it stands procedurally and what we're likely to see happen over the next couple of days. And there's some other weird stories looming out there too. Ooh, I gotta scroll back. It's Jobs Day, as it turns out, and I guess relatively decent news coming out, and I'm sure we'll see before long Trump out claiming credit for the creation of all of those jobs. Of course, I think probably most honest economic analysts would say, well, this is all pretty much holdover from the Obama administration. This would be February jobs, but, you know, that's the way it goes. The bright line gets drawn. He's president. He certainly can't claim credit for December jobs, and probably not even really for January jobs either. But around February, people start thinking that way, even though I think clearer heads usually say, well, you know, you got to give it at least a couple of months. And particularly if he's going to change anything about the way, you know, the major operands in the economy. And so far he hasn't been able to do that. But hey, it doesn't really matter that much. But I think we're running at about, what did I say, 235,000 jobs, something in that neighborhood. Yeah, that's what I see. And it's also true that Trump used to say that anything less than 300,000 jobs was really not even marginally acceptable. And, of course, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics was cooking the books anyway. But I guess that's all out the window now. No surprise there, and I don't think anybody should be shocked by the fact that that's likely how they're going to treat it. Okay. Let's see. I want to see if I can catch up on a couple of other things. Twitter this morning, I don't know, nothing super exciting, I don't think, unless I've already forgotten about much of it. I see, this is an interesting story that's circulating this morning, just in terms of alerting you to a weird bit of information. How about this one from Stat News, the healthcare reporters? Let's click through this one. This seems totally understandable from a from the analytical perspective of small government conservative republicanism versus big government liberal democratic governance. House Republicans would let employers demand workers' genetic test results. Not usually where we are first thing in the morning. Anyway, we'll take a look at that one. We'll open up Pocket and see what else we want to review for the morning. And, yeah, that's really about it. I want to check in on my super secret behind-the-scenes lists and see what's new, if anybody has so many other suggestions. And, of course, for those of you listening at home, if you're listening live, The Kagro in the Morning Show, that would be me. We're reachable via Twitter. It's very easy to find us and redirect the show entirely if you've got a good direction for us to go in, or a suggestion about something we might address or something we might have missed in the way we've addressed whatever we've taken up. Kagro in the Morning has its own hashtag. Why? Because Twitter can't stop us from having our own hashtag. They have no say in the matter. Well, I guess unless our hashtag is something obscene or otherwise endangering national security, they usually won't step in. KITM, Kagro in the Morning. Very easy. And if you include that hashtag, your comment will hang around just a little bit longer on my tweet deck, the application I use to keep track of what the hell's going on in the world. And the longer it lingers there, well, the more the chance that I'll actually be able to see it and get to it. Let's see, expressing some sympathies here this morning. Here's something. Before I get to the other news that grabbed me this morning, the fact that small government conservative Republicans apparently want to be able to read your genetic code and keep it for themselves thanks to the power of government. I thought I'd take a brief stop here. A video making the rounds has almost nothing to do with our coverage of anything, although it's another news show, sort of, as someone giving an interview, I guess, as a foreign policy expert, working from home, much the way we do here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, because they are co-located. If you think that's cheesy and cheap, well, lots of people are doing it. And to Breitbart, which would I'm sure argue to you that it's the most influential news operation in the world now that they have their own pet president. They operate out of the basement of a townhouse where, for all we know, Steve Bannon still lives. Still have not found any kind of answer to that question. I wonder whether he moved into the Trump hotel like the rest of the cabinet, or whether, I assume that until somebody forces him out of there, and I assume that would be a huge ethics issue. Not that they care about ethics issues, but I don't understand how that can continue on. But it does. Anyway, here's a clip I saw of someone giving an interview to the BBC News from their home office, which apparently is popular and being shared all over the place. Let me see if I can open it up so that you can hear it too. And he is giving an interview on TV, and I guess he's experiencing the joys of working at home as his kids wander into the study. The visual is better than anything. I tweeted it around. I'll share it in the roundup, but you can hear about what's going on here.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
Now, he's being interviewed by somebody about the North Korea situation, and as he's speaking right there, you can't hear, but you can see his young daughter has opened the door to his study and is marching in, really like strutting in, and I guess the interviewer notices it well before he does, because it's happening behind his back.
What will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. Shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
Now that's also. I should have reviewed this again. This is much more visual joke, but I'll run the tape, I guess, because never mind. Maybe I won't. I'll just share it with you again. And the interviewer notices that the daughter has walked in, and Dad reaches back behind. He will not take his eyes off the camera and puts a hand out, I guess, to kind of give them a gentle push back, like this is not where you're supposed to be. But he ends up sticking his hand in her face and giving her a shove. And then it's only a matter of seconds before his other child, I can't tell whether it's a son or daughter, it's a toddler in a walker seat, comes literally rolling in as well through the open door. And then a few seconds later, I don't know whether this is babysitter, nanny, mom, I can't tell, comes in afterwards. Now it's telling me the media could not be played. It now tells me I paused it too much and it's not going to play, but it's fantastic. The crying in the background, he handles it pretty well. I should just isolate the sound bit of the kids crying in the background, and we could fast forward to that. It's only a minute long, this clip, but let's see. In comes, there's the baby. Now comes the nanny or sitter, and then the dragging away from.
What's this going to be for the region?
Here we are.
My apologies. North Korea, South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited
There you go.
in the last 6 months to a year because of North Korea's behavior. Most recently, the use of VX gas in the airport in Malaysia that indicates that North Korea really doesn't follow global
it's not
norms.
quite as impressive,
And
I'm sure,
in
over
a way,
the
that's a
radio.
weapon of mass destruction,
But what can I tell you? I've already committed to this, but you got to see the nanny on her hands and knees. I guess it could be his wife. Who knows? I can't tell the age of the person from the video. The screen's too small, but on her hands and knees, holding one of the kids out the door, reaching for the handle of the door, a little bit of crying. It's a good way to wake up and a good way to remind yourself that even if you're talking about, North Korea assassinating political enemies with poisons in the Malaysian airports, you could still have a good laugh every morning, even though, murder and stuff. Anyway, let's see. We might as well get back to the news. There's no way to give you the full impact of this video without simply, sending you to it, as we will in our afternoon roundup. Thanks again to Scott Anderson, there for us each day. And let's see. Let's take a look at that crazy story from Stat News. That might as well just dive right into these things. Our writer Sharon Begley on this one, March 10th. Dateline. So guess what? That's today. I'm going to tell you what today's news is. Isn't that great? What a fantastic idea for this show. All right. Let's take a look here. A little noticed bill, it says, moving through Congress would allow companies to require employees to undergo genetic testing or risk paying a penalty of thousands of dollars and would let employers see that genetic and other health information. I guess it's not too shocking when you realize looming in the background. There's already, of course, laws that permit employers to, in the name of implementing workplace wellness programs, to implement quote unquote voluntary workplace wellness programs. Maybe you have one of those where you work, but the new rules also allow them to, how will we say it? To require essentially that you participate in it by attaching a penalty. That, in other words, you must participate in our workplace wellness program, which we will use to make sure that, for instance, you're not costing us a tremendous amount of money in our employee health care program. That is, employers are, of course, in most cases, paying at least half the costs, if not more, of employee health care benefits where they have such programs in place. Anyway, I guess so. They began to wonder, well, couldn't we implement these workplace wellness programs? Because nobody's going to object to having a workplace wellness program. We're going to keep people healthy. They like that. We'll help them lose weight and stay healthy. Everyone's going to want that. Though, as it turns out, it's also providing interesting information to their human resources department, who's likely to cost us the most money in premiums for our very expensive insurance for everyone. It harkens, well, you know what, we'll tie it in a minute to another news story that cropped up yesterday. Let's see. And I'll have to give myself a note on that one so that I can find it for you. Anyway, the loosening of the, well, you know what, this article actually does explain it a little bit further down, that employers wanted to be able to implement these programs, but they needed to make them a little more like what we would call voluntary plus. That is, you don't have to participate, but if you don't, we should be allowed to assume the worst about your health profile and charge you more to participate in our health insurance program. Similarly, they'd like the same flexibility. After all, why not? If we were to find out, for instance, that you had a genetic predisposition for a certain kind of cancer, perhaps you should pay more. Or if you were to block us from finding out that whether or not you had that certain predisposition, shouldn't we charge you as though you did have that predisposition? You can see it gets a little bit intrusive, but of course, small government, privacy, individual rights, etc., etc. That's the small government Republican mantra. So, in keeping with small government, they have kept this bill little noticed. That's their way of keeping it small government. You see, very few people know about it, and so therefore small. Giving employers this power to charge people extra for their health care if they don't participate in a wellness program is now prohibited, or rather the genetic information part is now prohibited by legislation including the 2008 Genetic Privacy and Non-Discrimination Act, known as GINA, genetic something, I don't know what the I is, but Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, perhaps. I don't know what the actual acronym is now that I think about it. The new bill gets around that landmark law by stating explicitly that GINA and other protections do not apply, notwithstanding any other provision of law, probably the language they used. They don't apply when genetic tests are part of a workplace wellness program. The bill is H.R. 1313, appropriately enough, easy to remember, easy to call your Congress people about and complain and tell them you oppose it. It was approved by a House committee on Wednesday, with all 22 Republicans supporting it and all 17 Democrats opposed. It has been overshadowed by the debate over the House Republican proposal to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. But the genetic testing bill, don't get too far ahead of myself here in the reading, is expected to be folded into a second ACA-related measure containing a grab bag of provisions that do not affect federal spending, as the main bill does. I guess we'll come under the umbrella of what becomes Phase 2, if you believe in a Phase 2, that Trump was referring to earlier in the week in his tweeting about it. What this bill would do is completely take away the protections of existing laws, says Jennifer Mathis, Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, a civil rights group. In particular, privacy and other protections for genetic and health information in GINA, and the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, let's go further back here, would be pretty much eviscerated, she said. Someone tell Bob Dole. Employers say they need the changes because these two landmark laws, GINA and the Americans with Disabilities Act, are not aligned in a consistent manner with laws about workplace wellness programs. Of course, you could just get rid of the laws about workplace wellness programs instead and leave it at that. So, employers say they need the changes because these two landmark laws are not aligned in a consistent manner with laws about workplace wellness programs, as an employer group said in congressional testimony last week. Employers got virtually everything they wanted for their workplace wellness programs during the Obama administration. So I guess we have some blame to lay there as well. The ACA allowed them to charge employees 30% and possibly 50% more for health insurance if they declined to participate in the voluntary programs, which typically include cholesterol and other screenings, health questionnaires that ask about personal habits, including plans to get pregnant, and sometimes weight loss and smoking cessation classes. And in rules that Obama's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission issued last year, a workplace wellness program counts as voluntary even if workers have to pay thousands of dollars more in premiums and deductibles if they don't participate. So that, while it's true that a good portion of the blame then belongs with the Obama administration, to the extent that we can actually blame anybody for it, I will say this, I mean, for all of the, once again, all the rhetoric that the Obama health care agenda was an abomination and tyranny in action and had to be opposed at all costs. Now with a Republican majority in place and a Republican president and the team there set to repeal Obamacare root and branch, they actually are going to expand this into genetic profiling. I find that interesting, to say the least. Okay, so maybe the door was left open by mistake. Good luck getting the horse back in there. Okay. Despite those wins, though, The business community chafed at what it saw as the last obstacles to unfettered implementation of wellness programs. And boy, what a full spectrum wellness program this is going to be. The genetic information and the disabilities laws were the last two obstacles. Both measures, according to congressional testimony last week by the American Benefits Council, put at risk the availability and effectiveness of workplace wellness programs, depriving employees of benefits like improved health and productivity. Wow, that's some spin. The council represents Fortune 500 companies and other large employers that provide employee benefits. It did not immediately respond to questions about how lack of access to genetic information hampers wellness programs. It's got to have some time to think about that. Maybe they should hand over their brain mapping. Rigorous studies by researchers not tied to the $8 billion wellness industry have shown that the programs improve employee health little, if at all. An industry group recently concluded that they save so little on medical costs that on average the programs lose money. But employers continue to embrace them, partly as a way to shift more healthcare costs to workers. Now there's a success, including by penalizing them financially. The 2008 genetic law prohibits a group health plan, the kind employers have, from asking, let alone requiring, someone undergo a genetic test. It also prohibits that specifically for underwriting purposes, which is where wellness programs come in. Underwriting purposes includes basing insurance deductibles, rebates, rewards, or other financial incentives on completing a health risk assessment or health screenings. That makes some intuitive sense. I don't know that I would have guessed that they ultimately lose money, but I guess, that's the reason you conduct such studies, to see whether they really affect the bottom line in the way you want it. And often you'll find that they do not. In addition, any genetic information can be provided to the employer only in a de-identified, aggregated form rather than in a way that reveals which individual has which genetic profile. That makes sense, right? Let's get rid of it. There is a big exception, however. As long as employers make providing genetic information quote-unquote voluntary, they can ask employees for it. Under the House bill, none of the protections for health and genetic information provided by GINA or the disabilities law would apply to workplace wellness programs as long as they complied with the ACA's very limited requirements for the programs. As a result, employers could demand that employees undergo genetic testing and health screenings. While the information returned to employers would not include workers' names, it's not difficult, especially in a small company, to match a genetic profile with the individual. That would undermine fundamentally the privacy provisions of those laws, said Nancy Cox, president of the American Society of Human Genetics, in a letter to the House Committee on Education and the Workforce the day before it approved the bill. It would allow employers to ask employees invasive questions about genetic tests they and their families have undergone, and to impose stiff financial penalties on employees who choose to keep such information private, thus empowering employers to coerce their employees into providing their genetic information. If an employer has a wellness program but does not sponsor health insurance, rather than increasing insurance premiums, and what other interest would there be? But apparently there is one. Here it is. Then the employer could just dock the paychecks of workers who don't participate. But why? If they don't provide health insurance, what would be the excuse? The privacy concerns also arise from how workplace wellness programs work. Employers, especially large ones, generally hire outside companies to run them. These companies are largely unregulated, and they are allowed to see genetic test results with employee names. They sometimes sell the health information that they collect from employees. As a result, employees get unexpected pitches for everything from weight loss programs to running shoes, thanks to countless strangers poring over their health and genetic information. Wow. Well, that was unexpected, and thanks to Karen, who I think was the first I saw retweeting this story today, and I didn't grab it when I first saw it, though I was interested in it. I saw someone else, so it's circulating widely. Karen comments here, isn't workplace wellness genetic testing about shifting risk? The overarching goal for the GOP for decades. Well, in that sense, yes, I suppose that's true. It's not consistent with their small government rhetoric, but nothing else ever is. So I suppose we shouldn't be surprised. Yes, And shifting of risk is assuming, greater proportions than we ever imagined was sensible. Anyway, that brings me to another story, although I see you've included a link here. But the internet is just moving like molasses today. And, we'll let this thing churn for a while and see what it is that the link opens up. But if it's not what I'm thinking, I will bring you there in another roundabout sort of way. Let's see. Yesterday, I saw circulating via Twitter. Let's see. Well, there we go. It's right up top because one of our other listeners, I think Lisa listens live. Lisa Iannucci, I know, has we've called her name in the on the show in the past. Karen, by the way, Karen D, tweeting as KARESF. We've mentioned her name and handle on the air before, but if you missed it the first time, do follow along. Lisa Iannucci retweeting my retweet of Neral's tweet from the other day. This is rather interesting. And more video, so maybe we'll open it up. Their comment, wow, the GOP's reason to object to insurance covering now prenatal care. This is really rather amazing. I guess this must have happened in the markup. Which committee, I'm not entirely certain off the bat here, but as you know, they were marking up the Republican repeal/replace bill, and I guess it got down to, in the discussion of things, got down to why should insurance cover prenatal care? After all, men don't bear children, and so what's the point? I mean, he actually kind of went there. Now, never mind that half of the children, more or less, who are receiving the benefits of the prenatal care are male, but that doesn't interest him. It's women are the ones going to the doctors, so why should men be paying for it? It's really rather remarkable. Let's see if we can open it up so that we can roll that audio and then identify who it is who's talking if we can. Let's see.
Our friend from Oklahoma.
I'm going to have to stop this and crank the volume on this, I think. Let's try again. Okay, so it's a discussion between, I think, the initial speaker, a Democrat on the panel, questioning the, I don't know what, I guess the brain power and logical processes of one of the Republicans on the panel as well. Here we go.
Our friend from Oklahoma. None of us think this bill is perfect. I've never heard a single Democrat say that this bill was perfect. We knew that it needed work, and we wanted for the last 7 years to work with Republicans to try to improve this bill. You guys weren't very interested in that. I'm not sure what the gentleman is talking about when he talks about mandates. What mandate in the Obamacare bill does he take issue with? Certainly not with pre-existing conditions or caps on benefits or letting your child stay on the policy to 26. So I'm curious, what is it we're mandating?
Would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, sure.
What about men having to purchase prenatal care?
What?
I'm just, is that not correct?
Reclaiming my time.
And should they?
Reclaiming my time.
Whoa.
There's no such thing as a la
Regular
carte.
order.
There's no such thing as a la carte insurance, John. You don't get to.
That's the point. That's the point. We want the consumer to be able to go to the insurance market and be able to negotiate on a plan.
Reclaiming my time. You tell me what insurance company will do that. There isn't a single insurance company in the world that does that, John. So you're talking about something that doesn't exist.
So that is that looks to be Michael Doyle of Pennsylvania, the main speaker, who John is that he's fighting with. I am not certain. We'll see if we can look that up, but might be able to make that out from a listing of the committee membership there. He's up on the top part of the dais there, so we might be able to figure that out. It's probably the Energy and Commerce Committee. Yeah, that's where Doyle serves. So let's go take a look over at the listings for the Energy and Commerce Committee. The majority members, John, who might be up at the top of the dais near the chairman there, would probably, I'm going to guess, although he said Oklahoma, right? Didn't he? Or maybe he was talking about somebody else's proposal, but he was arguing with John. And you know what? How about this for a surprise? There might only be one John on that committee. How's that for some interesting demographic shifts in Congress? The only Republican John up there is the 4th ranking Republican John Shimkus of Illinois. So, I mean, unless he's, and given the way the dais is arranged there, the likelihood that he was in fact, not to mention the policy under debating with John Sarbanes of Maryland, is pretty low. So that's interesting. So John Shimkus sitting there just, bald-faced, insisting that men were paying too much for insurance because it was covering garbage like prenatal care for women. As though, by the way, the whole life begins at conception pro-life thing, I guess that's out the window. Well, maybe what we should be doing is insuring fetuses. Or, and how are they gonna shop for best prices of insurance? Even if there's a website, and even if the website works, there's just no way for a fetus to shop online for insurance, even if insurance is sold across state lines, although that would be an interesting thing too, right? Mom lives in Illinois and wants to buy insurance that covers her prenatal care, but the fetus, while recognizing the value of prenatal care for himself, prefers to buy a cheaper catastrophic coverage plan marketed in Nevada, and objects to, what are we supposed to do with this? Not to mention, of course, the fact that who are we speaking of just a minute ago? I've already lost track of it. Michael Doyle. Mr. Doyle brings up, a la carte insurance. That's just, that's not a thing that exists. You don't get to choose that. And as many people pointed out, as Rebecca is pointing out here this morning, Rebecca Romans, to put it, mildly, let's say, why should women have to pay, as she says, for men's boner pills and prostate surgery? Doesn't affect us. Probably not. However, it's, my own reaction, I took it out of that realm and just said, since an early age, I don't have tonsils, and I don't see why I should be paying for other people's tonsillitis or tonsillectomies. I've already had mine. I got mine. Screw the rest of you. I don't really know why I have to pay for that stuff. But that's sort of one of the concepts of insurance. It's not the central. A lot of people actually, would say, it is a lot more central than anything else. That's what cost sharing is at the heart of insurance, although it's really not necessarily. It's betting against eventualities. It's at the heart of insurance, and it doesn't really require that we underwrite one another, but it does have the tendency to keep costs low across the board. And, of course, there has to be some mechanism, and you'll lose in it on upfront costs, perhaps, but there has to be some mechanism for keeping people involved in the insurance pool before they actually have that eventuality. So, their cost shifting is certainly a central tenet, if not, but it's not necessarily the central tenet, not the central motivation for people to, certainly not central motivation for people to join insurance pools. But all right, let's see. Matthew Edmond has this comment also. I'm sure there are a lot more Johns in Congress than they'd like their wives to know about. That's probably true too, and we could help reduce that number by telling people, listen, we have no interest in paying for your Cialis for daily use. Why not? Anyway, it was pretty obvious to, certainly immediately obvious to half the population it was insulted up front, and probably half of the other half of the population figured it out too. But not John Shimkus, whoever that is. Should look into this guy. See what the hell's wrong with him. All right. Oh, he's got a Wikipedia entry. I want to see this guy's face. Doesn't look any dumber than anybody else. But hey, that's judging a book by its cover. And we don't do that. Just in case you were wondering, Illinois' 15th district, lifelong resident of Collinsville in Illinois, the part of the St. Louis metropolitan area, so downstate there, I guess. And anything else of interest? Well, interestingly, his paternal grandfather was of Lithuanian descent, an immigrant. Let's kick him out. Anyway, just thought I'd point that out. interesting exchange as between the two of them, and I was reminded of it by this interesting and intriguing article about expanding genetic testing information. Amazing that Republicans have gotten to that point, but there's no point in pinning them to anything or any logical underpinnings or historical rhetorical positions, just to put a little bit of rhyme spin on it. Let's see. Other fun things that are well worth discussing. Let's see. Oh, yes. Here's something I wanted to correct for the record, because it was out there and Vox said it, and not only did Vox say it, it was Matthew Iglesias said it, and I noticed Josh Barrow repeating it and tweeting the link to it and saying, generally agreeing with their take on things here that I think requires a procedural tweak, if you will. The weird mystery of the Trump administration's agriculture secretary vacancy, writes Matthew Iglesias, subtitled, Sonny Perdue's stalled confirmation is not explained because nobody knows what's happening. And that part is true. If we stop there, nobody knows what's happening, and it's weird and it's mysterious, and that's all there is to it. But it goes on from there. Sonny Perdue, Donald Trump's nominee to serve as agriculture secretary, has not yet been confirmed, and nobody knows why. Now, this comes up in the context of Donald Trump tweeting the other day that it was pathetic that Democrats in the Senate were so slow and dragging their feet on the approval of his cabinet nominations for purely political reasons, and they were just terrible people for having done so. And that came, of course, in the wake of the confirmation of the very last person who had actually been nominated to a cabinet position. There are still 2 cabinet-level vacancies in the traditional cabinet-level department vacancies, agriculture and labor. There's a labor vacancy, of course, because the original designee, Andrew Puzder from Carl's Jr., dropped out, and we have since had another named in his place. And Sonny Perdue, a latecomer to the nominations game, there was a long time that they just didn't even have a designee for agriculture because, I guess if you think about it, Trump, right? What does he know or care about agriculture? That's definitely the furthest thing from his mind. But farmers love him, but there's no chance in hell that he knows anything or cares anything about agriculture. Do you think? Honestly, Trump Tower, the penthouse of Trump Tower is about as far removed from the salt of the earth as you could possibly get. So no surprise that he had nobody in mind and had no idea where to turn for an agriculture secretary. When he finally did hear from somebody who knew something about agriculture, I guess I didn't know what they knew, but whatever it was, it caused them to decide that Sonny Perdue was a good idea. They gave him the name, and still nothing. No nomination. So what's the story? Well, Vox reports it this way. So it's not that Democrats are obstructing his confirmation. Since changes to the Senate's filibuster rule, they can't block a Trump nominee unless they recruit 3 Republican no votes. And in this case, Perdue, it's unlike, say, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. They aren't trying to do this. That is, to find 3 Republicans who would oppose him. Nor are they resorting to extraordinary measures like the all-night debate that stalled Attorney General Jeff Sessions' confirmation. It's not all that extraordinary. We have seen it for all of them. But it's extraordinary outside of the Trump administration. Or the committee walkouts that dramatized ethical issues hanging over the heads of Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin or Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. We saw how those came out. The reason the Senate hasn't approved his nomination is that he hasn't actually been officially nominated yet. Paperwork hasn't traveled down from the executive branch to the Senate, so no hearings have been scheduled, even though Perdue does not appear to be a controversial nominee. Nobody knows what the problem is Section 2, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Here is where I have to do the tinkering. It's not outright wrong, but it needs some tweaking. The reason the Senate hasn't approved the nomination is that he hasn't been officially nominated yet. But the reason that the Senate hasn't had hearings on Perdue is not because he hasn't officially been nominated yet. I mean, it may be related to it. It may be that the chairman of the Agriculture Committee has said, I don't want to waste my time having hearings for Perdue if there's some possibility that he may not eventually get that nomination formalized on paper if he ends up having some sort of situation that leads to a Puzzler outcome, and if he declines to accept the nomination for some reason, or they withdraw his name for whatever reason, they don't want to waste time on it. But you don't need to have the formal paperwork on a nomination to have the hearings on the nomination. We knew that already, but we saw it amply demonstrated with, let's say, almost every other nomination to a cabinet-level position under the Trump administration, and indeed every other nomination for cabinet-level positions under all previous presidents. Anybody who had a hearing prior to January 20th was, in fact, having a hearing before the Senate without any formal paperwork. There couldn't have been any paperwork nominating Jim Mattis, Rex Tillerson, Elaine Chao, or any of the rest of them before January 20th because there wasn't a President Trump to sign it. And yet we had multiple hearings for multiple nominees just on the anticipation that they would become officially nominees. They could not vote on those nominations to confirm them. January 20th is the earliest that you're able to do that. You do have to wait for the paper to be signed and be delivered to the Senate in order to act on it. They still insist on that level of formality, but you can have hearings on whatever you want. Since that doesn't actually do anything for you, you can have hearings all day on people you think are eventually going to be nominated for these jobs. But Sonny Perdue isn't getting that, so that's where we get to nobody knowing what the problem is. Perdue's nomination, the article continues, appears to be in limbo due either to the FBI background check or to financial conflicts of interest considered by the Office of Government Ethics. But it seems nobody is entirely sure whether there's an actual problem, how serious the problem is, if it exists, or whether the vetters are simply overwhelmed with other work. They don't seem to have a reason as to why his name hasn't come up, Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley told reporters back on March 2nd. Trump put forward his initial round of nominees with less attention paid to vetting than has been traditional for recent presidents. That's putting things mildly. Problems later arose that forced his nominees for Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, and Secretary of Labor to withdraw. Only Labor, of course, they're a cabinet-level position. In the case of Labor nominee Andy Puzzler, the issue was a mix of intense liberal opposition plus a considerable amount of scandal. The Army and Navy Secretary nominees withdrew after deciding that there was no satisfactory way to resolve their financial conflicts of interest that they were personally comfortable with. So it is conceivable that Perdue has run into a business interest problem or that something more scandalous has come up. But it's also conceivable that the Trump administration's delayed interest in vetting has simply backed things up. Perhaps the Agriculture Department is simply a low priority. Trump swept up votes in rural America, but his personal interests are in a big city real estate development, and his trade protection agenda would be a disaster for American farmers. The truth is, nobody in Washington seems to know. Democratic Senate aides profess to be genuinely baffled as to what the holdup is. They are also somewhat uncertain as to whether Trump is deliberately lying when he says the Dems are blocking the confirmation of his remaining nominees. Puzzler's replacement as Labor Secretary, Alexander Acosta, also hasn't been formally submitted. So, are the Dems, is he just lying about the Dems blocking the confirmation, or is he simply confused about what's going on? The next section here, a not very controversial establishment Republican. Were he to be actually nominated, it seems like Perdue's confirmation would be an easy one. Democrats are not going to commit to voting for Perdue even before he's been nominated, but the Perdue pick very much follows in the mold of some of Trump's less contentious nominations, like Rick Perry, I guess if you can believe that, at the Energy Department, or Elaine Chao at Transportation. Meanwhile, agriculture issues are more dominated by interest group lobbying than by sharp partisan conflicts. Perdue is seen as reasonably well qualified, coming from a farm background and having served 8 years as governor of Georgia. And in general, Perdue's outlook on issues is very conventional Republican Party fare. Additionally, Perdue has been a conventional Republican free trader most of his career. Agribusiness interest groups have been counting on him to carry that torch into the Trump administration. Bob Young, chief economist at the American Farm Bureau Federation, which likes Trump's ideas on deregulations and tax cuts, disagrees, though, on trade, voiced tremendous optimism about Perdue as a free trader in an NPR interview when he was first nominated. He's run businesses on farm inputs, fertilizer sales, for example. That seems appropriate for a high-level politician. He's also run a business basically set up to promote trade of agricultural products. It's also worth noting that Perdue was an early adopter of anti-immigrant politics in the GOP, so that'll make him put him in a favorable light in Trump world. As governor, he signed a law that imposed a harsh crackdown on undocumented workers back in 2006 when George W. Bush was in office and pushing for a comprehensive reform bill that would include a path to citizenship. But in 2010, Perdue was already warning that nativism had gone too far in some conservative circles, cautioning fellow Republicans to avoid a gang-type mentality and to make sure that people of color and people who are not U.S. born feel welcome in the United States and in the Republican Party. Good luck with that one. Next section here, pointing out the machine is not that fine-tuned. It's possible that the very farm-related businesses that made Bob Young optimistic are the problem, causing some kind of conflict of interest that Perdue hasn't yet resolved in a satisfactory way. It's also possible that the problem has something to do with Perdue disagreeing with Trump on trade and immigration. Early Trump picks were often made without regard to the nominee's previous stances. Defense Secretary James Mattis, for example, was a proponent of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Perry called Trump a cancer. But hey, since settling into office, Trump has become increasingly concerned about leaks coming from inside the government and thus more focused on loyalty. Whatever the problem is, the Trump administration has not conveyed any information about it to the public, to interest groups, or to allies on the Hill. Trump's inaccurate March 3rd tweet complaining that Democrats are blocking cabinet nominees he hasn't formally nominated has been only his most recent commentary on the subject, or has been his only recent commentary on the subject. Meanwhile, cattle trade groups have been reduced to writing public letters to the administration urging Trump to ask the Senate to act speedily on the nomination. What nobody is saying is that whatever the holdup is, it has absolutely nothing to do with the Senate. Way back on February 9th, the ranking Democrat on the Agriculture Committee met with Perdue and issued a friendly statement saying she was looking forward to having a confirmation hearing after the committee receives the required documents. 4 weeks later, the reality is they still haven't. Well, the other reality is they don't need to, and so it's something relatively serious. No one's talking, but whoever is handling the nomination on the White House side has, you can only assume, told the chairman of the Agriculture Committee that they don't want hearings to move forward, or that it might not be worth their time for hearings to move forward at this point. Because otherwise, what else is the Agriculture Committee doing, right? They're not meeting, and we should take a look and see what their schedule has been. I mean, they have other issues, obviously. Well, let's just take a look. I don't even know who's the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee. Let's drop by and visit. It looks like Pat Roberts is the chair of the committee from Kansas. The ranking member who they referred to but didn't give the name is Debbie Stabenow. So let's see. What would be up in the hearings agenda for them? Let's take a look and see what have they been spending their time on. Today's the 10th. Well, They haven't met since their initial business meeting on January 31st. Their next meeting is on the 17th. Really? Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was a February 17th meeting. It's not 3/17. So they've met 3 times. January 31st for a business meeting, another general business meeting on the 17th, and then a February 23rd meeting, hearing from the Heartland perspectives on the 2018 Farm Bill from Kansas. So they actually had a field hearing in Manhattan, Kansas, at the McCain Auditorium at Kansas State University. Those of you familiar can cheer about that one. So they've met 3 times, only twice in Washington. They've done nothing other than wait for this nominee. And I imagine that the spirits are probably pretty low there in terms of taking up major agriculture initiatives in a Trump presidency. So there you have it. Just wanted to straighten that out. Just the fact that there's no papers doesn't prevent them from doing it, and they're clearly not busy with anything else. They could, if Pat Roberts believed that the committee would be well served by spending time reviewing the nomination of Sonny Perdue, because he definitely was Donald Trump's nominee for Secretary of Agriculture, that could be getting done right now. That could have been done a long time ago. It's not happening because he's got reason to believe from somewhere, from somebody who's not talking to the press, believe it or not, that either something's going to go wrong or you might as well wait because we have to finish up this investigation, or he's got to finish up his separation from his business, and there's no point in... but, honestly, you could just have your hearings and say he's good except for separating himself from his business, which he wants to do before having a vote, and we're not going to send his nomination until he tells us he's done with it. He can tell you all about that conflict of interest as it now stands and what he's doing to resolve it in the hearings. And then we can just start to work on the actual nomination once he's ready. But they're not doing that. So that leads me to believe that there's something beyond even a separation from a business that poses a conflict of interest. What it might be, I have no idea. I'll be very interested to find out myself. Anybody have any ideas out there? Has anybody got thoughts about it? Anybody listening in Georgia that has some suggestion what Sonny Perdue's problem may be? Let us know. I don't see it, and I can't imagine it. I just don't know enough about Georgia politics to ponder it. Let's say it would be irresponsible to speculate that he wasn't with Donald Trump in that Moscow hotel room when Trump did P-Gate, which I totally believe now. I still can't quite bring myself to believe that one. I just like to say it a lot. Although Maxine Waters apparently was out yesterday with some comments, totally unsupported and offering no evidence one way or the other. But she seemed insistent that it was her belief that the rest of the dossier, including the sexual allegations, was going to be proven more or less correct. And I guess it might just be a matter of time till we find that out. But hey, I'll sit tight on that one. I won't walk around saying Trump did P-Gate or anything like that. That would be irresponsible. So don't do it. All right. What other interesting stuff? Yes, since we're playing so much video today, let's risk copyright infractions one more time with this piece, which is labeled a must-watch, which means, obviously, you have no choice, from Yashar, who is the New York Magazine and Daily Beast contributing writer, who many of you may follow on Twitter. After all, he has a blue check mark, so you must follow him. You have no choice. Shep Smith, the renegade anchor from Fox News, who very frequently goes off on his own tangents and says things that are very un-Fox News-like that eventually come to nothing and changes no minds in Fox world, but it's certainly worth monitoring from our side, as apparently, as he says here, goes all in again. You got to watch this. Trust me. He's frustrated, can you believe it, with the Trump administration. Let's crank up our volume.
And was forced to resign after 24 days on the job, was also working to help the Turkish leader as a lobbyist during the U.S. presidential campaign.
He's speaking, of course, here about Mike Flynn, the news about whom we heard yesterday that he has retroactively remembered that he was a lobbyist for the Turkish government during the campaign. That ticks Shep off to no end.
Michael Flynn now admits he was working to help Recep Erdogan, the authoritarian Turkish president, during the run-up to the United States election. Got $500,000 while, among other things, writing an op-ed for The Hill saying how great Erdogan was and how awful a Turkish dissident was, backed by the United States. And he did that while we were deciding who would be our next president. And while he, the former Army Lieutenant General and intelligence chief, was on the campaign trail with Donald Trump, complaining about pay for play, as he was paid to play by a businessman in support of the Turkish leader whose voting base is Islamic voters.
Lock her up. That's right. That's right. Lock her up.
He chanted about Hillary Clinton. Lock her up. Before he was on the Trump transition team and before he became the national security advisor. Mike Flynn registered as a foreign agent, not before he became one last year, but night before last, retroactively. And now the man who paid him is actually asking for his $500,000 back.
Good luck.
Let's bring in Julie Bykowitz, the White House reporter for the Associated Press, who worked on this story for AP, which broke the news. Julie, the White House said, he was a private citizen at the time, but there's been a lot of lying, Julie.
There it is, the word we were looking for. Been a lot of lying. Interesting. Thank you, Fox News. There's more. Oh, but now the media can't be played. Apparently, the lesson here is if you're playing embedded video in Twitter and you pause it more than once, you can't go back to it. All right, let's see if I can just skip forward to where we left off.
Bring in Julie Bykowitz, the White House reporter for the Associated Press, who worked on this story for AP, which broke the news. Julie, the White House said, he was a private citizen at the time, but there's been a lot of lying, Julie. And there's been a lot of lying. There's been lying about who you talk to, and by lots of people, and almost inevitably and invariably, they were lying about talking to the Russians about something. It's too much lying and too much Russia and too much smoke, and now they're investigating. Where are we in this thing?
Good question. Well, all well put. I don't know whether anybody is going to care very much what Shep Smith had to say, especially in the normal Fox viewership, but we'll have to wait and see how that one develops. Well, once again, I don't know. I guess it still works for the Fox business model, and they can point to him and say, see, we're not biased. We're fair and balanced. We have one guy who occasionally says that, there's a lot of lying going on. All right. Let's see. Other information, other stories now percolating that I have for you here in pocket. Another thing that requires a look at the technical and procedural aspects of things. Talking Points memo has this coverage, a story entitled GOP Lawmaker Calls on Senate to, quote, go nuclear to pass health care repeal. This is written by Alice Olstein, and she's talking about Dave Bratt, the Republican from Virginia who beat, you'll recall, Eric Cantor in that primary. Was that, I guess, is he in his second term now? I can't even remember when that happened. But you'll recall that he Tea Party primaried Cantor out of a job, I guess probably the 2014 elections, as I recall. Although maybe, I don't know, Trump is warping time in my mind, and I'm having trouble remembering what it used to be like back in those days. Anyway, obviously a very ultra-conservative type of member, and I guess it goes hand in hand with being relatively clueless about everything else in the world. Republicans in Congress, the article notes, are in a bind. House conservatives are complaining that the Donald Trump-endorsed bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act retains or replicates too many of its rules and provisions. But if these members prevail in stripping out those provisions, the bill has no chance of passing a more moderate Senate, where any non-budgetary modifications to the health care law must clear a 60-vote threshold, and where Republicans currently hold only 52 seats. Of course, this is, I guess, this exhibits most of the symptoms of the I don't know what you would say. I guess a generalized either disinterest in spending any of your precious word limitations explaining the real ins and outs of Senate procedure, or just simply not quite getting it. I think just more that it's shorthand than anything else, but it leads to confusion later on, so I thought we'd straighten this thing out. It's true, of course, the underlying issue is that more rabid conservative House members are upset that this isn't a full repeal of all the provisions of Obamacare. These, of course, would be the extremists who hold the view that even the extraordinarily popular provisions of the Affordable Care Act, if you call it that instead of calling it Obamacare, that even conservative opponents out in the heartland, in the real America, oppose, or that even they support, rather, from the Affordable Care Act, these guys want to get rid of. Things that we heard in the debate on the Commerce Committee between Mike Doyle and John Shimkus, we heard Doyle say that even most Republicans support being able to keep your kids on your insurance until the age of 26, eliminating the ability of insurance companies to refuse to insure you because of pre-existing conditions, or dropping you because you hit a lifetime cap. These things, of course, among the most popular provisions of the Affordable Care Act. But guys like Dave Bratt want those things repealed too, and they're upset that this repeal-replace bill either doesn't repeal them or replaces them once it does repeal them, even in modified form. So they'd like to see the whole thing, as they usually say, torn out root and branch, but there is this issue. As Paul Ryan reminds them, the Senate and its rules likely stand in the way. Although really what should be noted here is that what stands in the way is that there aren't enough senators who actually agree with your position to get the thing done. It's not really procedure so much that's going to kill a bill like the one Dave Bratt wants, except insofar as procedure requires a majority vote for it, and you're not going to get it. Instead, they focus on supermajority issues, but I think they miss the point here. And of course, this sort of summary view of things that any non-budgetary modifications to the healthcare law have to clear a 60-vote threshold is, well, it glosses over what that threshold is and why it's there. It's not a filibuster that well, in some cases, it might not be a filibuster that becomes the issue. It might, in fact, be budgetary points of order, which require 60 votes to waive. But, of course, the reason they chose 60 votes to waive them is because that mirrors the filibuster's threshold. But let me get back to the article here, and then we'll get back to the explanation afterwards. To solve this conundrum, that is, that the more moderate Senate won't have the votes to pass an ultra-conservative bill, the Freedom Caucus members and current holdout on the bill, like David Bratt, told reporters Thursday that the Senate should blow up its 60-vote rule and push the bill through with 51 votes, overruling the Senate parliamentarian. Bratt described it as, quote, going nuclear, a term which in recent political history has meant blowing up the Senate filibuster. This is a different scenario, but the upshot would be similar, avoiding a Senate filibuster. Holding court with reporters in the ornate House Speaker's lounge after a vote on Thursday, Bratt complained that House Speaker Paul Ryan has urged Republicans to be mindful of the Senate's rules, which limit what policies they can include in their bill. In other words, he has said, listen, this one is very extreme, and I personally like it, and you like it, but we're not going to get it past the Senate where it'll be filibustered. And they say, oh, well, why don't we put it into reconciliation? Because that can't be filibustered. But, of course, there are strict rules about normally what can and can't be included in reconciliation. We've kind of been over this. I've never really spent any time, probably would have to do an entire show on reconciliation. That's too boring even for me. I hate reconciliation. But generally speaking, I think we are all more or less aware that reconciliation rules normally require that any provisions you jam into this protected bill have a budgetary bottom line impact, and that they have the effect of reducing the federal deficit. Because there was a time, back when they wrote these rules, that people cared about the federal deficit and meant it. And we're not really in that time anymore, but that rule remains. And it's a big pain in the neck for Republicans. It's a pain in the neck for Democrats too, but it's a pain in the neck for Democrats because they bend over backwards to honor it. Republicans, it's a big pain in the neck because it presents a roadblock, and they have to find the votes to overrule it so that they can violate the spirit of the law up front. Democrats find it a pain in the neck because they try to comply with it. Republicans find it a pain in the neck because it's hard to get the votes to steamroller it. But there you have it. Once again, one of the inherent contradiction in our our usual understanding of who's conservative, who's liberal, and what that means. They've done a great job on the Republican side for 30 years selling everybody the notion that they are the fiscally responsible. They love that, fiscally responsible group, when in fact every time they're given a ruling majority, they explode the deficit. Then they go into the minority where they spend all their time complaining about the deficit and blaming it on the Democrats who were in the minority when they created it. But hey, we all know that. Okay, so here he is holding court with reporters complaining about Paul Ryan telling them, yes, you like this provision, yes, I like this provision, but it's not going to cut the mustard in the Senate, and that's why we're not including it. We want to write a bill that can pass the Senate. So here's Bratt's comment on that. He, meaning the Speaker, wants to be respectful of the Senate rules. I do not, Bratt said. I can kind of get interested in that. I mean, from my own perspective. Anyway, we're getting information, he says, that everything we want is being blocked in the Senate. Insurance regs stuff especially. And that's a frequent complaint of members of the House. But I don't buy that, he says. Whoever is sitting in the chair can rewrite the rules. Well, that's a little bolder than I would even state it, but very interesting. The rule that would need to be overridden is the Byrd rule. Bratt derided it as the Byrd bath rule, and that is a casual term that is in fact in use, and I don't know if it's really derisive. Usually when people use the Byrd bath terminology, they are talking about the process by which proposed amendments are tested and informally ruled upon by the parliamentarian's office to give the senators proposing them a preliminary look at how they did on compliance with the Byrd rule. And all the amendments are proposed, and then they all go through the Byrd bath, and the ones that emerge from the other side with an indication that the parliamentarian would be inclined to rule in their favor, that they were germane and allowable under the Byrd rule in a reconciliation bill, are the ones that get offered. And you can, of course, overrule the parliamentarian. That's true. Ordinarily that, it's not frequently done. And of course there's another method of doing it, which is not to overrule the parliamentarian, which you can do. This is ironically, you can totally nuke the thing with a majority vote if you use procedure correctly, and you simply say, the ruling from the chair upholds the parliamentarian. You appeal the ruling of the chair, and you can overrule the chair with a 51 vote majority. It's just rare that things set up that way. Or you can acknowledge the parliamentarian's position that this thing runs contrary to the ordinary rules, but you can waive the point of order against it that would otherwise ordinarily prevent it from being offered by a vote of 60 or more. You get the idea? Same threshold as a filibuster, but a different thing. So, the article goes on to say, the rule that would be need to be overridden is the Byrd Rule, which imposes limits on the legislative process that Republicans want to use to pass Obamacare repeal. The process, known as, everyone, reconciliation, requires only a majority vote and thus avoids a filibuster. Under the Byrd Rule, it can only be used on legislation that impacts the federal deficit. More or less true. It can be used on other things that likewise in some ways do affect the deficit. But there are 3 or 4 general provisions, types of provisions that can be included in a reconciliation bill, including debt ceiling limitations, raising the debt ceiling. Now that doesn't, well, I guess it doesn't impact the federal deficit directly. In an indirect way, obviously, I guess it would, because you'd have to issue that debt. But that's something that is specifically exempted and available for use in reconciliation that doesn't have a direct impact on the federal deficit. So just to let you know that, one, that's not the correct description of the limitation. But again, who wants to shoehorn that into an article? I do. But that's why we're here on the radio to do it. But no one else does. Okay, the other thing to straighten out here, the process known as reconciliation requires only a majority vote and thus avoids a filibuster. Yes. No. Maybe. The more accurate way of describing how and why, I'll get to the why in a minute, but how reconciliation avoids a filibuster is this. It's, and it doesn't say, the reconciliation rules don't say you only need a majority vote to pass this. It doesn't say that. What it says is there is a time limit on debate in the Senate on reconciliation bills. When there's a statutory time limit or an agreed upon time limit because of a unanimous consent request or some other previous order of the Senate, that what would we say? That abrogates, that negates the necessity for a cloture vote, and therefore eliminates the possibility of filibuster. You see, if you can only debate a bill for 20 hours, if I recall correctly, that's actually the number on a reconciliation bill. When the 20th hour comes around, debate's over. So there's no need to hold a cloture vote to end debate. No one can keep debate going past the 20-hour mark, and immediately following the 20-hour mark, the next question is on passage. So you just go right to that. There's no need for a cloture vote, and therefore no possibility of filibuster. Now, that still leaves out the question as to why, and we'll get to that in a minute because Bratt has more to say that I think informs some of that. So I just thought we'd go back and say that it's not that it requires only a majority vote. Everything requires only a majority vote. The only thing is, can you get to the vote on final passage or not? Is extended debate getting in the way of calling the question for a vote? If it isn't, or it can't, statutorily, then yeah, it needs only a majority vote to pass, because that's how you pass things in the Senate. Bratt is calling for an amendment to the bill that repeals the essential benefits requirement, allowing people to purchase cheap insurance plans that don't cover basic services and preventative care. Why? Not really sure. Ryan and other GOP leaders say changes to those regulations could come in a later phase of their healthcare overhaul, but that isn't fast enough for hardline conservatives like Bratt. And again, first of all, let's take a quick look at what he's actually proposing. He wants people to be able to buy insurance that doesn't do anything. Why would anybody want that besides being a total idiot? I guess the best interpretation you can give there is, well, he realizes that everybody needs to be involved in the pool of the insured, paying into a pool somewhere. But I guess this is something that he wants. I guess you would think maybe that either, well, the people who are supposed to buy it, I guess, would be the young and vulnerables, the 20-somethings who don't have a great deal of money available for expensive, comprehensive health care coverage, but very often don't need it or don't think they need it anyway. And many times they're right. They're 20-something and they haven't had the onset of diseases and other infirmities that tend to set in greater, or tend to have a greater likelihood of setting in as you age. And so they would like to be able to put aside more money for, well, if they're like truly responsible, well, if they're really responsible people, they'll just buy insurance. But if they were their version of responsible people, they're putting aside money to start a family so that they can raise a bunch of libertarians, and they're socking this money away or investing it in Bitcoin or God knows what. I don't know what a good libertarian wants people to be doing with their money, but who cares? Because they're not supposed to tell anybody what they want. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. They want them to be able to buy insurance that covers hardly anything. Of course, if they get sick later on, they might realize, gosh, I need better insurance than this, and buy it. And they, of course, then will need the pre-existing condition bar to prevent insurance companies from preventing these suddenly sick 20-somethings from buying the insurance they really needed all along. But I guess in the meantime, they get some minimal contribution to the pot that we use to lower costs across the board and to pay out against policies where people actually do get sick. If the 20-somethings just simply opt to buy zero insurance, then there's $0 going into the pot. And if they just buy crappy insurance, then at least there's $10 going into the pot. That's the best spin I can put on the Dave Bratt idea for allowing people to be sold insurance that doesn't actually cover anything. Okay, so that's what he wants. Now, Bratt complains, is it true that we can't change insurance regs? Bratt asked reporters on Thursday, because that is the cost driver. If you could change that, you could get me to a yes on the bill. It seems incomprehensible to me that we can't. Bratt was initially under the impression, by the way, that the Senate passed most of the Affordable Care Act through reconciliation. Oh my, isn't that amazing? Somebody with a seat at the table to vote on actual policymaking has little to no idea of how that policy was actually made. Reporters, it says here, who covered the 2009 battle corrected him, explaining that Democrats had 60 votes at the time and only used the reconciliation process for a few final regulations once they lost their 60-vote supermajority due to the death of Senator Ted Kennedy. I stand corrected, he said, before directing the gathered reporters to describe him as humble in their reports. Everybody make sure you write that I'm humble. That's well put there. Post-correction, Bratt continued to insist that repealing Obamacare is so important that the Senate should be willing to, quote, go nuclear. Look, healthcare is 1/5 of the economy, and we have to structure this thing right, he said. Bratt is not the only House Republican grumbling about the limitations imposed by the Senate's rules. Fellow Freedom Caucus member Representative Trent Franks of Arizona told TPM on Wednesday that if not for concern about the Byrd rule, House Republicans would already have found consensus on a plan. To put a health care repeal and replacement through the Byrd rule is like trying to put a giraffe through a keyhole. What? He'll be a little beat up on the other side, Franks quipped. That's not much of a quip. The Byrd rule changes everything. I don't know how to explain it. It's like putting dirt in ice cream. You can't fix it after that. Well, I know how to explain it. Here's the basic thing. Now we get to the why portion of the question. Why should reconciliation be protected from the filibuster? Why did they do that? Why did Byrd write the rule that way? And I do mean Byrd wrote the whole thing, not just the Byrd rule about what gets to go in reconciliation and what doesn't. The Budget Act of 1974 is the bill that established the reconciliation process, and Byrd had a tremendous hand in writing that and in writing the regulations afterwards. And now I'm trying to think. Let's see. I think I want to be sure about. Did he have? I'm pretty sure that he had a big hand in crafting the original budget bill. But let me just take a look and make sure. I mean, do they mention that? I don't know if that's going to be necessarily in the Wikipedia entry there. But let's see. I'm pretty sure that that should be credited to him. Certainly the Byrd Rule, the Byrd Rule, I guess, was promulgated after 1974. I think it was the early 80s that he really brought that forward. But I do think that reconciliation, the process, was originally part of the 74 Budget Act and just really didn't get used until it was fine-tuned in the 80s by Byrd when he was steering things. Okay, well, at any rate, that's probably not necessary to know. But why they protect reconciliation at all is a good question, right? What's the point of protecting it from the filibuster? Why would you single it out from among all other kinds of legislation? And the answer is that if it was used for what at the time was believed to be an indisputably good position that would get bipartisan support, that is to say, at the time, this was the beginning of the big national concern about growing federal budget deficits and the national debt. It was assumed, well, you could get bipartisan support anyway for a bill that lowers the bottom line, that cuts spending, that lowers the federal deficit, and that therefore contributes to lowering the national debt. And though that would require tough choices, because it means cutting things, and people don't necessarily always like cutting things, you could get Republicans to agree to it because it cut things, and they like cutting things, they like spending less money, and you could get Democrats, at least some, to agree to it too, because while it's a laudable goal, and even Democrats, of course, generally speaking, will agree with the idea that we ought to spend less where possible, it's a tougher decision for them to make actual cuts to programs that they like or that their constituents benefit from, but they're willing to make that choice to improve the bottom line from time to time. But requiring that such a bill that has so many compromises built into it and makes such hard choices clear a supermajority requirement is a tall order. And it gives individual senators a little too much power to blow up a compromise that otherwise can achieve majority consensus, sometimes across the aisle. And so it was thought to be a good idea to protect that from the filibuster and just say, let's have a straight up or down vote and see if we can't cobble together a majority, but only for bills that will lower the federal deficit. It would be all too easy, of course, to find a coalition majority for something that would raise the deficit. We could give away more money. That's not all that hard usually to find votes for. Cutting programs but improving the bottom line, that required a delicate balance. And so they gave it a magical pass, essentially. This was one of the first statutory limitations on debate in the Senate, and there were other examples that came later, including the now better known and infamous Congressional Review Act, which likewise built its own restrictions on debate into in the Senate into its rules. So what they're basically saying here on the Republican side is, yes, there's parliamentary magic in the Budget Act that protects the reconciliation bill from a supermajority requirement. But we would also like our special bill to be protected from the strictures of budget rules. We don't really feel like it ought to have to cut the deficit. We don't really feel like it ought to have to find a way to present itself as responsible spending, or in fact spending cuts. We feel like in addition to protecting this thing that we want from the filibuster, it should also be protected from budget rules. And you shouldn't be allowed to use the budget to tell anybody that what we're doing is actually a terrible idea and increases the federal deficit and increases the national debt. Could we have that too? And the answer is GTFO. What are you talking about? No, you can't have an extra additional parliamentary gift just to pass what you want in opposition to everybody else. Dave Bratt and the rest of the Freedom Caucus people, Trent Franks in particular, because he's on the record here, don't seem to understand what reconciliation was created for and why it got a pass from the general Senate rules. They just know that it did and don't really know why. Well, why not just have a pass for some other rules too? In fact, at that point, why not just say, you know what? If the majority of the Republicans in the Senate vote for the bill, but they're the only ones and they're opposed by nearly 3/4 of the rest of the body, shouldn't that be it? Why can't we have a rule that if Dave Bratt likes the bill in the House, that it only needs 25 votes to pass in the Senate? I don't really know why we don't write that into it. I mean, after all, the chair can change the rules. They can nuke the rules to whatever they want. And I guess, to some extent, that's true. So why don't you just be honest about it, Dave, and go to the Senate and say, here's the rule here's the way I want you to blow up the rule. If somebody votes for this bill, count that 100 times. And if anybody else votes on the bill, who cares, right? Okay, so if one guy votes yes on the bill, that should really be enough. And in fact, honestly, should the Senate really even vote? Couldn't you rule from the chair that the House already likes this thing, so that's really all we need? Well, you could. I think that would probably insult the entirety of the Senate body, but you could rule for, so why not just slip them a note and ask them to do that? Maybe Pence will take the chair that day, and he'd be willing to do it. In other words, it's just a ridiculous view of things to say, well, it's protected from the filibuster, so why can't it also be protected from every other Senate rule that might possibly get in the way of these things? And the answer is, gee whiz, I don't know. Maybe you should run for the Senate and ask. Anyway, it's not all House Republicans who have this problem. The article goes on to mention that other House Republicans, including Representative Michael Burgess of Texas, say that even under reconciliation rules, Congress can, maybe he does have the same mistake here. Let's see. Even under reconciliation rules, Congress can still approve the same basic repeal of Obamacare that passed both chambers in 2015. That bill, like the one currently under consideration, garnered votes of almost every Republican despite the fact that it left many regulations in place. If people want to complain about the fact that pre-existing conditions are the same now, they were the same in 2015, Burgess told reporters on Thursday. We did not repeal pre-existing conditions. We did not repeal lifetime limits. We did not repeal the essential health benefits. We did not repeal kids on their health insurance until age 26. Those things that were available to us under the reconciliation rules of 2015, and they aren't available to us. They weren't available under those rules, and they aren't available now either. So his point here instead is, what's making the difference? And the answer is, I guess, the political atmosphere. The ability to deliver on campaign promises, interestingly enough. I don't know whether I think Burgess has the more realistic view of things or not, but he is bringing up a good point. That is to say that the Freedom Caucus members who are now saying, I will vote no on this bill because it doesn't do all these things, it doesn't repeal these aspects of Obamacare, Burgess is reminding them, in 2015, you voted yes on a bill that also didn't repeal those things. Why was that an okay vote to cast in 2015 and a not okay vote to cast in 2017? And the answer is, I was being hypocritical in 2015. In 2017, I mean to be honest and show people that I really do oppose the bar against pre-existing condition exclusions, and I really do think we ought to kick kids off their health insurance at 18, and I really do think that we should allow lifetime limits to be reinstated. So a good point that he makes there, and not necessarily a procedural one, but all the procedural mistakes are made by Dave Bratt. No surprise, he's got no idea how any of this stuff works. Now you do, and maybe you can wow someone with your knowledge over the weekend. Or, I guess, equally likely that you could say, I can't quite explain it, but there's a guy on the radio who can, and you ought to be listening to that show. There's always evangelism. We can always do that. All right. Let's see. What other things do we need to round up before the weekend? There's a couple of things. I got some reading for you to do or some reference material for you. I saw being shared this morning. I think probably pretty wise. It's an older piece, but something from The Atlantic that goes back to 2015. Let me see if I get this thing to open up right. Oh, we got to take care of our ads first. Norm Ornstein piece from back in 2015. You probably read it. We probably read it, or at least referred to it on the air. The piece is The Real Story of Obamacare's Birth. Why am I referring to this story, or why do I think you ought to refer to the story? The answer is, over the weekend you're likely to hear from Republicans on television, or I guess in real life, if you run into any, that the reason that the House Republicans pushed their version of the bill through so quickly and without allowing any Democratic amendments in committee and without even so much as a committee print of the bill until the day before the hearing and markup was held is that's what Democrats did. And why are they using reconciliation to pass their bill? Because that's what Democrats did. You just saw Dave Bratt make that mistake and get corrected in the previous article. All of that is, if not outright wrong, then it totally disregards the actual nuance of the process, and Norm Ornstein retells that in this article. It will help you come to understand what actually happened, how long the process actually took of passing the Affordable Care Act, how careful they were to consider Republican amendments, even though they rejected a lot, if not the vast majority of them. But they certainly let some survive and come to the floor and even incorporated them in. There was a great deal of bending over backwards that apparently has been forgotten, and Norm Ornstein's piece will help remind you of it. So I suggest it for your review. Let's see. Moving on from there. We've been over this bit here, but this is, I guess, a new angle on things that will become important over the weekend. A piece appealingly called What the Hell is Going On at the State Department? Written by Kevin Drum over at Mother Jones. This weekend, this will become an issue as Rex Tillerson takes off on his first major overseas trip to Asia and has barred the press from accompanying him. This is apparently an enormous insult among the members of the press who are, I don't know, I guess I would say, they tend to react this way whenever they are directly insulted and tend to react along more traditional lines of, gee whiz, one side says one thing, one says the other, when other people are being insulted. But okay, they're more and more catching the drift here and seeing it everywhere, not just when they're getting insulted. Kevin Drum writes, what the hell's going on at the State Department? It's about this. Here's Jake Tapper's comment about that. Seriously, folks, WTF, Kevin writes, is going on with the State Department. Jake Tapper's tweet is embedded here, which reads, Secretary of State Tillerson about to embark on first major trip to Asia in the midst of the North Korea crisis, not bringing any reporters. They find that to be a major insult. The press, Kevin says, is not happy. D.C. bureau chiefs from major news organizations, including New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Wire Services, Fox News, and CNN sent a letter to the State Department earlier this week protesting Tillerson's decision to ditch reporters on his upcoming trip to Asia. Not only does this situation leave the public narrative of the meetings up to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, as well as Korea's and Japan's, but it gives the American people no window whatsoever into the views and actions of the nation's leaders. The American public will get the official narrative, and that's it. The odds are also slim that Tillerson himself will have anything to say about his meetings. He literally has not spoken with the press in, weeks? Months? Since the day he was confirmed? A few reporters have gotten desperate to find out what's going on. Here's NBC's Andrea Mitchell several days ago trying to get a few words out of Tillerson. And you've likely seen this video. We're going to play another bit of video. Here we go. This is Andrea Mitchell trying to get a question in at a photo op.
Mr. Secretary, can you do your job with the kind of budget cuts the president has proposed? What does it say about the priority of diplomacy in this administration? Do you think you'll have a deputy anytime soon, sir?
Thank you. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you. We're done.
Do you think
Thank
you might have a deputy?
Andrea, this way, please. Come on, guys. Thank you. Come on, let's go. Andrea, come on, guys. This way. This way. Out, please. Out.
Now, the video that goes with this, and again, you'll see it because it'll be attached to the article, and we'll include that in our roundup, is of the press being brought into a room at the State Department to take pictures of Rex Tillerson meeting with, I don't even know who he's meeting with another foreign dignitary. And one question or one set of questions is posed, and then that's it. But they were really literally brought in to take pictures of Rex Tillerson and this other foreign dignitary and then leave. And State Department staffers are literally almost linking arms and walking in a human chain to push the reporters back out of the room. And you may have seen over the past couple of days Bill O'Reilly referring to Mitchell's behavior as unruly. And you would have seen other members of the press pushing back on that and saying it's not that she was being unruly, she was being a member of the press. She was trying to ask a question of the Secretary of State, a very high-ranking official in the Trump administration. And the question was, what are you up to? What are you doing? What is the State Department doing? Are you going to have any other deputies there soon? Are you going to be able to perform diplomacy given the budget cuts that are being proposed? Because Tillerson's not fighting back against any of these things. Normally, the cabinet secretaries work very hard to defend their turf. I mean, that's understandable. Some of it is about personal power, but it's really one of the dynamics that's supposed to be at play in the budget process. There's supposed to be an adversarial process for everything. We love adversarial processes in this country. Many of you think we don't, but we do. So just hold your horses. You understand? See, we do everything by adversarial processes here. And although the president has appointed these cabinet secretaries, it's expected that they'll fight back a little bit and come to understand as quickly as they can the value of the various programs and operations going on in their departments, and will push back against Congress, against the president when it comes to budget cuts or the elimination of programs, and say, I've interviewed the people who run this thing. I understand the motivations behind it. These are the reasons why it's a good thing. At the very least, couldn't we keep some of these cuts to a minimum? Tillerson has taken a totally different approach. He's just flat loyal to Trump, period. He knows he'd never be anywhere near this position if it wasn't for Trump, because he doesn't bring any qualifications for it. And also he has no understanding of this stuff. So he just simply says whatever the boss wants, the boss gets. I'm not going to fight him about budget cuts. I'm a corporate employee. This is one of the drawbacks of run the government like a business kind of thing. Although even in a business, you know, the division head comes back to the boss or the CFO or whoever he has to deal with on budgeting and says, you don't understand. You want to cut our budget by 10%. We can't afford that. We're not going to be able to provide this function, this function, this function that's vital to this company unless we have more money. And they haggle back and forth and maybe come out with a 5% cut or maybe whatever. But oddly, I don't know. I guess this is interesting. Maybe this is what happens when you try to run the government like a business by filling it with CEOs who are used to getting their way and are used to or prefer deference to the CEO. And they're not the CEO of the government. They're the CEO of their little department. And so they just give in when it comes to budget cuts. It may be that. It may also be, of course, that, everyone is always talking about how Trump is bringing in department heads who are dedicated, like he is, to the destruction of these government departments. And that's why they're not offering any opposition. So I don't know. Not really 100% sure whether one or the other, or maybe some combination of both, is motivating that. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting that he has no response. That's not surprising. But I also thought it was interesting the fight people are having over whether what Andrea Mitchell did was proper or not. Most normal people say, yeah, that's what the press does. Bill O'Reilly says you're being unruly. I was a little bit bemused by that, and I watched everybody pushing back on her behalf, and that's fine. Although there was a little bit of irony to it that it was Andrea Mitchell. I mean, she's so senior in the press corps, but she's also so prone to, the old school both sides-ism of traditional media journalism. I thought it was an important point, and I hope someone is discussing it with her at some point. You are right, Andrea, and Bill O'Reilly is wrong, but I would love to see you spend a moment recognizing how quickly and easily somebody with the wrong kind of motivations could impose, if not both siderism on you, then at least hang the label on you that you're being unruly. And I would like that to be in your mind next time it's suggested to you that a protest which is peaceful for all intents and purposes, but is also attended by a few members of an anarchist, black bloc group who are there to take advantage of the press attention to the event and use that press attention to divert resources to their own destructive acts. If you then report the protest as prone to violence, you can see how easily that label is hung on the protesters, and that's unfair, just as it was unfair to hang the unruly label on you. So I wouldn't mind if we spent a minute or two discussing the import of that. Since I've just done that, we'll move on with the article and get back to the question of what the hell is going on at the State Department. She tries again a few days later. I guess it wasn't even that particular instance that motivated Bill O'Reilly to call her unruly. She tries again, it says a few days later, but it sure looks like all the same people are there in all the same outfits. Anyway, how long is this piece? Is another 42
there will be consequences for the deployment now of anti-missile defenses in South Korea. Can you respond to our excuse me, Mr. Secretary, can you respond to the threats from China?
I love the fact that they are always a thank you. Like, that's good media training. You're not supposed to say, get the hell out of here, goddammit, I told you to get your butt out of them. You're supposed to say thank you, so that all that's on the record is you thanking them, and that's not a bad thing. But that video embedded from YouTube is actually labeled here, leftist Andrea Mitchell, push and physically removed after, I guess, shouting questions, etc. It's amazing what they're trying to do to her with this, and I hope she recognizes what that means. Anyway, Tillerson, it says in the article, has fired a big chunk of his management staff. He has no deputy. He won't talk to the press, and he won't take them along on foreign trips. He failed to show up for the annual release of the Human Rights Report. He's apparently happy to accept a budget that slashes both the State Department and foreign aid by more than a third. He doesn't get invited to President Trump's meetings with foreign leaders. Hell, the State Department doesn't even know they're happening. And here is an embedded tweet that has a transcript screen grab here. The question to Mark Toner, the spokesperson over at the State Department. Question. Hi, yes, thank you. Hi, Mark. I see that the foreign minister of Mexico is in town. Luis Videgaray. There's no accent marking here. Videgaray. Videgaray, I'm going to guess, in the absence of any marking. Meeting with, according to the Mexicans, Kushner, Gary Cohn, who I don't know, and McMaster. Is there no State Department meeting with him? And if not, why not? Mr. Toner says, Tracy, good question. We'll take that and get back to you. I was unaware that the foreign minister was in town. And I'm not sure. I can't speak to whether there's going to be any meetings at the State Department at any level. I'll take the question. And then just a thank you from the questioner. And this comment from Ankit Panda, who, let's see, he's, again, got the check mark. I never know who anybody is. So let's take a look at his profile. Thinking, writing, speaking on global security, politics, and economics. Senior editor at Diplomat. How do you like that? So obviously a close State Department watcher saying, wow, wow, wow. State Department acting spokesperson Mark Toner has zero idea the Mexican foreign minister was in Washington. Department of State totally cut out. Or as our president would say, totally cut out. Not good. Except he thinks it is very good. Very, very good. Not bad. The entire State Department is completely adrift, says Drum. If it were Trump pulling a stunt like this, we'd chalk it up to some kind of bizarre revenge fantasy festering in his brain. But why is Tillerson doing this? Is he under orders from the White House? Is he too scared to talk to reporters? What the hell is going on here? And it's a question being asked in all quarters. And no answers, as far as I can tell. But I think going to increasingly become an issue, and one you'll probably hear about over the weekend. I mentioned also yesterday, and I included yesterday, I will refer you back to it. I mentioned that there were a couple of Bloomberg articles about Steve Mnuchin and his loyalty and the picks that he's making for the Treasury Department and their loyalty. And I couldn't find at airtime, but did include in yesterday's roundup, and you should look for it. It's not always easy to identify exactly which piece it is because of the highly stylized way, and I appreciate the high style of it, of the way Scott puts these things together. We don't just give you the bullet points. This is the article we were talking about. Sometimes it makes it difficult if you're trying to, quickly identify which one is which. But wherever you see Mnuchin and loyalty being discussed in yesterday's roundup, one of those links is the one we're talking about. There's two from Bloomberg, but an interesting video piece about how it is that Mnuchin ended up in this job anyway. And I think it's great background for, and maybe we really ought to just take a look for it. I think I put it in Pocket and then archived it. Geez, I hope so. Or maybe did I just directly put it in my mail to Scott? But there was, I thought it was really kind of fascinating in terms of how important personal loyalty is to President Trump and how clear it is to his nominees who are, after all, cabinet members. They really do view themselves as subservient to the president in a way that previous cabinet secretaries really just simply have not. I'll bring it up here. Here's the Bloomberg bit about how Stephen Mnuchin ended up getting the job in the first place. We'll just let it roll here because it's good background and it probably applies to more than just Mnuchin. It's going to take a while, of course, here we go.
How does a Goldman Sachs alum with 3 decades in finance and 0 experience in the public sector end up with their signature printed on American money if confirmed by the Senate? Because of one trump card, loyalty to Donald Trump. Stephen Mnuchin's path to the 77th Secretary of the Treasury of the United States happened because he was in the right place at the right time. This is the story of how Stephen Mnuchin saw the deal of a lifetime and took a gamble on Trump to become the most important financial figure in America.
If you were to write a novel about a privileged young man setting out on a privileged course of privilege, you would write about Stephen Mnuchin.
Privilege.
That's Max Abelson.
I'm a reporter at Bloomberg News.
Max followed Mnuchin for weeks for a Bloomberg Business cover story with
Zach Mutter. I'm a reporter on the finance team here at Bloomberg.
To track Mnuchin's path from Wall Street to Hollywood to bank ownership to politics. First, some background. Stephen Mnuchin is the son of Robert Mnuchin, a former partner at Goldman Sachs for 3 decades.
Who was so respected that his nickname at the investment bank was Coach.
Stephen Mnuchin attended Yale in 1981,
where he was a member of the Skull and Bones Secret Society and drove a Porsche in New Haven,
where he was publisher of the Yale Daily News.
Stephen Mnuchin was ceaseless in his attempts to get across to us that he was the youngest ever publisher. He kept emphasizing that the publishers are normally juniors, but he did it as a sophomore.
After graduating in 1985, he took an internship at the investment bank Salomon Brothers. When his internship ended, his career at Goldman Sachs began. In 2002, after 17 years at Goldman, Mnuchin left to work at a hedge fund owned by the liberal billionaire and enemy of the right, George Soros.
He wanted to start his own fund, and he started it under the auspices of Soros. And then later, he kind of went off on his own, gave it its own name, called it Dune Capital. But the funding was still from Soros.
Mnuchin then branched out into the arts. In 2006, he got into Hollywood, buying a DreamWorks film library in partnership with Soros, and he financed movies, one of which was Avatar, the highest-grossing picture of all time. His next career move, while making Mnuchin extremely wealthy, has been a lightning rod of controversy.
I'll pause it here. I mean, this is the important part of his career, the part that actually made him a billionaire in his own right and let him enter into the Donald Trump orbit, even though Donald Trump himself is probably not a billionaire. All very interesting background, but not necessarily the part that I need you to hear. But I think it's all part and parcel. I had a difficult time parsing this out, and of course there's no transcript of it, so I couldn't just simply give you the highlight parts. I think it makes a good package, though. I'm going to keep rolling here.
He said that in the summer of 2008, he was watching news footage of people lined up around the block of a bank that was then called IndyMac. He said out loud, "I've seen this game before. This bank is going to fail. We need to buy it."
A group of Goldman Sachs partners.
By the way, just for a pause there, the mindset here. This bank is going to fail. We need to buy it. Not ordinarily what you think, but hey, he's a counterintuitive kind of guy. He sees angles that others don't, right? So back to Goldman Sachs.
Led by Stephen Mnuchin, cobbled together $1.6 billion to kind of recapitalize this smoking crater of a bank.
Mnuchin changed the name of the bank from IndyMac to One West.
And like within a year, it was just stunningly profitable.
And it was profitable at the same time some critics started calling it a
foreclosure machine.
They foreclosed on something like 36,000 homeowners during that 6-year period. When they went to sell the bank last year, there was a public hearing, and borrower after borrower stood up and gave these horrible stories.
According to Bloomberg calculations, after Mnuchin sold One West for $3.4 billion in 2015, Mnuchin may have personally pocketed more than $380 million from the sale.
When Trump talked to people about Mnuchin, what he was so impressed by was the amount of money he'd made on that deal.
After IndyMac and Hollywood, Mnuchin's turn to politics came from a chance encounter with Donald Trump at a Republican primary victory party in New York.
Okay, so we pause. Up to this point, this has all been about, well, this is why Stephen Mnuchin is a dirty guy and probably doesn't belong anywhere near government, period. But because he fleeced a lot of people and made a crap ton of money in one deal, Donald Trump was impressed by him. So now we get to this. Now, where does Donald Trump's interest in putting him in government start? And where does Mnuchin start thinking about being in government? Let's roll that.
He wasn't planning on being on stage with Trump, but then he sort of ends up bumping into Trump beforehand and going on stage with him. And the next day, Trump asks him to help him on the campaign. And he asks Mnuchin to start fundraising for the first time. And so it's going to be a 6-month investment of time that could pay off big time at the end.
He said to Zach and I, no one's going to be asking why I'm doing this if I'm in the administration.
And Mnuchin was right. The payoff was huge. When Trump won the election, Mnuchin was rewarded for his loyalty during the campaign with the Treasury role. But like Trump, Mnuchin's views on economic policy are shrouded in mystery. So while there isn't a whole lot to go on in seeing how Mnuchin will navigate political waters, he fits in perfectly with a Trump cabinet that is low on experience, but high on loyalty.
I thought very interesting, and amazingly, that there's really nothing to his move into politics, but that he made a whole lot of money, and that interested Trump, and they bumped into one another at one point. He goes to a victory party, the victory party in New York. Trump says, there's a guy who's super rich and became rich by screwing a whole lot of people all at once and made $380 million. I want to talk to him. And then he said, you know what? I want you to be on my team and give me be my financial policy advisor because you made a lot of money screwing the hell out of people, a lot of people. I want you on my team. And Mnuchin said, what the hell? I'm at Goldman Sachs. I'm my own man here. Nobody's going to fire me for not showing up at the office all the time if I'm on the team of a presidential campaign anyway. And if I win, well, man, talk about your windfall. I'll be Secretary of the Treasury. I can do whatever the hell I want. I can reward everybody who gave me time off or for some forbearance for the time I spent on this side project nonsense, but with huge payoffs. It's very interesting. So there's no point at which Trump says this guy is the kind of financial genius that a nation needs, that can move these kinds of forces and make this kind of thing happen in the economy. I just know he's a tremendous cheater and works the angles and does the unexpected in order to fleece lots and lots of people. And he's right in front of my face. It's like I'm watching TV and he's right there. That's how he sees the world, of course. And that was it. That was all it took. You made a lot of money and you're here right now. Okay, not, does he have the chops for fiscal policy? Nothing like that. Just here he is, and he knows that I know that he would never be Secretary of the Treasury unless I had no idea what I was doing and I saw him in front of me and I knew he was very rich and I would make him Secretary of the Treasury. That's such a huge favor. I can expect his loyalty from here on in. That was the piece that helps set up the piece that we discussed a little bit yesterday. So we've done it in a little bit in reverse order, but a discussion of why Mnuchin, in setting up his own Treasury Department, I mean, remember, he thinks that the rewards are going to be huge. I'm going to get to run the Treasury Department. But Trump never gets out of that mode. There's no payback mode for the loyalty, really. It's just more payments on top of more payments on top of more payments. If you are loyal to Trump, loyal enough that he will bring you on board and reward you with the Secretary of the Treasury position after the election, at that time, normally people then say, good, I can set up and here's my reward. I'm supposed to be able to run the Treasury Department the way I want to. But it's still not true. Donald Trump still says to him, you can only have people that I approve. I made you. You still have to remain my man. And he's doing it at the State Department. He's doing it at Treasury. He's doing it in every department everywhere. And it's extraordinarily dangerous. And I think everybody kind of saw it coming. But I think that some of these guys really thought that they were going to get their day, that they were really going to be able to run their little kingdoms the way they wanted to. And I don't know whether they'll put up with it for the entirety of the term or whether those people who are independently wealthy will get frustrated and take off and say, forget it, to hell with this. We'll have to wait and see. And speaking of waiting and seeing, you're going to have to wait and see what else we have in pocket till next week, because it's time to hand the show, or rather the reins of Netroots Radio, back over to the Netroots Radio guys themselves for the after show. What do they have in store for you? Trump advisor Roger Stone communicated with Russian hackers before the election. Leaked emails reveal Trump backer Nigel Farage's long-standing ties to Julian Assange, and investigative journalism reveals Silicon Valley's
From
dark
Daily Codes
underbelly.
Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
It's not just the dark underbelly, it's the dark underbelly of white nationalist Trump bros. I guess we all suspected they were really there, and maybe Martin Shkreli really woke us up to the reality of these guys. We're going to find out more about that on the after show next, plus some more on the last half about EPA head Scott Pruitt. You won't believe it when you hear it. Stay tuned.